Just as a disclaimer, we want you to know that some of the movies that we will be reviewing were shot in a different time and era where people of race and sex were not treated equally. We understand this and hope you do too. The movies or anything that happened on the sets are not the views of this podcast or what this show is intended to be all about.
Exactly. And we want to give due diligence in presenting the movie and not the views of the cast or directors or anyone involved. But we also feel it's necessary to let the audience know some of the background information to get a feel for what was happening at the time of shooting the film. Again, we hope you understand that we do not agree with everything that went on, and we just want to give out the information. And with that being said, hope you enjoy the show.
There is a fifth dimension, beyond that which is known to man. It is a dimension as vast as space and as timeless as infinity. It is the middle ground between light and shadow, between science and superstition, and it lies between the pit of man's fears and the summit of his knowledge. This is the dimension of imagination. It is an area which we call the Twilight Zone.
All right, guys, welcome back to the Tragedy of Cinema podcast. This is our Twilight Zone series, episode 18, The Last Flight. I'm here once again with my good friend, ADZ.
Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. And who are you? Who am I? You didn't give your name.
I'm just a nobody. I'm just a nobody, just doing this little podcast. I'm Jimbo, as usual. So, thanks for listening. Eric, let's go ahead and take this one right away.
All right, here we go. Episode number 18 of season 1, entitled The Last Flight. It was directed by William F. Claxton, and it was written by Richard Matheson. Don't see any writing credits here for Rod Serling. That's odd. And it's based on, it doesn't say if this is, I'm assuming this is a book called Flight by Richard Matheson. And again, we have some featured music, which is stock from Where Is Everybody by Bernard Herrmann. The original air date.
That was the first episode of The Twilight Zone. They reused some of the music from the first episode, Where Is Everybody? I thought that was really cool.
Oh, okay. The original air date was February 5th, 1960, and dates are going to be kind of important keys to this episode. So go ahead, Jimbo.
Right. I think it would have been really cool if they could have released this episode on March 5th.
That would be cool.
That would have been really cool.
Go ahead, Jimbo, with the cast.
Oh, you ready for the cast?
Yes, sir.
My bad. So we have Kenneth High as Flight Lieutenant Decker, who's the main World War I pilot in this episode. He's probably most famous for playing Brutus in Cleopatra. Simon Scott played Major Wilson. Alexander Skirby as General Harper. This guy has been in a lot of stuff, but one of the things I found that I watched when I was a kid was The Shaggy Dog, where he played Dr. Mikhail Andrassy. Robert Warwick as Air Vice Marshal Alexander McKay. Harry Raybould as the Corporal. Jerry Catron as the Guard. Jack Perkins as the mechanic, and Paul Baxley as the Jeep driver. The synopsis for this episode is a World War I fighter pilot who gets lost while flying lands at an airbase in France 42 years in the future, controlled by the U.S.
All right.
Eric, you ready?
Sure. So we drop in to this episode. Actually, we don't drop in. We're deep in a thick cloud. We encounter Terrence Decker, or Lieutenant William Decker, if you want to give his title. And he is flying through a thick cloud, and this is just some pretty cool footage. and he is flying in obviously a very old antique style World War I plane. It reminds me of the episode of Charlie Brown when Snoopy's the barn,
the Red Baron.
Yeah, the Red Baron, the barnstorming Red Baron. That's
exactly what I was going to say.
That's the type of airplane that he's flying. And there's a little bit of a clearing. He comes down and he lands at an air base. And actually, the slide over in the video says, "Welcome to Lafayette Air Base in Reims." I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Reims, France. And so we come to find out this is a U.S. installation in France, a military air base. And he's looking around. But it's important to note his surroundings. There are all these modern-day Air Force jet fighter planes that are on the, I guess you would call it the tarmac or the runway or whatever. So his plane really sticks out quite a bit. And he's kind of confused. He doesn't understand what's going on. He's got the full garb on, the leather helmet, the goggles, and he's taking them off, and he climbs out of the airplane. He's greeted by two airmen, and they're asking him questions like, "What do you think you're doing?" Basically he was flying in front of another airplane, I guess, as it was trying to take off or land or whatever, one of the planes on the air base. And they ask him a couple of questions like, "Are you French?" And we come to find out that Lieutenant Terrence Decker is British, and we come to find out a little bit more about him, that he is flying for the Royal Navy Corps. So I did a little bit of research about the Royal Flying Corps, not the Royal Navy Corps, if I mispronounced that. The Royal Flying Corps, or RFC, was the air arm of the British Army before and during the First World War, until it merged with the Royal Navy Air Service on April 1st of 1918. To form the Royal Air Force. During the early part of the war, the RFC supported the British Army by artillery and co-operations of photographic reconnaissance. So I guess they were originally, remember, airplanes hadn't been around. They'd just been invented by the Wright brothers maybe like 6 or 5 years earlier or something like that, 1911, or maybe it was earlier than that, I can't remember. But so they were actually an arm of the British Army before they became their own entity. I thought that was interesting, and they were called the Royal Flying Corps. And even in the episode, they questioned, "No, aren't you in the Royal Navy or something like that?" And he's like, "No, the Royal Flying Corps." And he's really adamant. And there's a patch, actually, if you notice, on his arm that says the Royal Flying Corps. I thought that was pretty interesting for continuity. So, Jimbo, did you have some remarks?
Well, no, we're coming up to one of the scenes that I find pretty interesting of this is when they grab him by the arm, and they're leading him. They put him in this Jeep, and the Jeep drives to basically, I guess, headquarters, if you will. And he's looking around like he starts to wander off, and they grab him by the arm again, and start escorting him around. And this is probably my favorite part of the episode is he's walking, and then this lady in her uniform is walking by, and gets the suit. He's like, he looks at her, like, whoa, and I didn't know. I didn't have time to look at this, but here. I was going to ask you this question. I don't know if you'll know this. In World War I, when Decker is from, were women allowed to be in the service?
Not during World War I don't think, but we're in 1959. So in this,
that's what I'm saying. So when he turns around and looks, because she gave him the salute, I was wondering if maybe he's like, why is a woman in uniform saluting? Because they're not in the service, at least in that capacity, if you will.
Yeah. Well,
so I didn't know the exact time frame of when they were, when they weren't. You know what I mean? So I didn't know if you had anything about that. So that's just something I wanted to point out as they're going into the headquarters.
That's an interesting pickup. I didn't notice that, but yeah, that would be a good explanation. I did notice the weird look, but I didn't put the two and two together. So that's a good explanation of why he might have given her kind of an off-putting look there. So he moves from the Jeep. They escort. Let's get our characters together. This is the Major Wilson, played by Simon Scott, escorts him into George Harper, the Major General's office, and he comes into the office, and Lieutenant Decker is very formal. He stands up straight, and he enters the office, and the general, Major General Harper, is kind of like, is this some kind of joke or something? Why is this guy dressed up in this costume? And he even asks him, why are you in this costume? Are you in some kind of air show? I think that's part of the line. Decker doesn't have any idea what an air show is. He's like, air show, sir? So everyone's a little bit confused. And then we, through a series of questions, and really they're kind of grilling him, and they're kind of the Grand Inquisition there. They're trying to find out who this guy is, why he's on their air base, how he got here, all the, the normal questions that someone would ask. And they think it's all a big hoax or a big goof or something, that this guy, he's really playing the part and he's not cracking at all. And so this goes on for a while. And we come to find out, again, who he's flying for. But the most important thing that we find out in this particular scene is the dates. Lieutenant Decker is asked what's today's date, and he says March 5th. But he thinks he's in 1917. And Major Wilson says, no, it's March 5th. You got that part right, but it's 1959. And you see Decker mouth the words 1959. And you kind of get clues that there's some time travel involved because, earlier in the episode, Decker says, wow, I didn't realize, one of the quotes was, I didn't realize you guys were so advanced here on this American base. And so there are clues that lead to this point, and he's having trouble, speaking of Decker, he's having trouble coming to grips with the fact that, what has happened, that somehow he has gone through a thick cloud. He goes on to describe the cloud as being like a thick vacuum-like cloud, and it has spit him out on the other side of 1917, basically, to 1959. So, Jimbo, did you have anything that you wanted to add?
It's just very interesting, he's very adamant. He's like, look, I'm telling you, when I took off this morning, he said it was 1917, and now you're telling me that's 42 years in the future, basically. So, I can't blame the officers here. If somebody came dressed, in this costume and for 42 years ago today to my house or to my place of employment and said, hey, and I'm here, and especially somebody that's flying an aircraft, especially after we have just went through the world wars, they got to be on high alert because we just went through all this stuff. They're in France. Is there still some animosity still left over, maybe some renegades, if you will, that can possibly cause damage to the base, to sabotage, another Pearl Harbor, if you will. So I don't blame them for being on edge like they are.
Yeah.
But it's just all very weird. And you kind of feel sorry for Decker, too, because, he's like, I don't understand what happened. And I think it's really, really pretty good. So go ahead, Eric.
So, again, like we said, this scene takes a while, and we learn about this particular man, Mackay, and this particular gentleman was the man that Decker was flying with, and Alexander, his name is official name is AVM Alexander Leadbottom Mackay, and that's our secret word is Leadbottom for this episode. I'll go ahead and interject that here, and if you watch the episode, you'll get the reference. So Decker is describing flying with this man, and he tells the story that they got separated. Normally they flew in pairs, and they had gotten separated in the air, and that there were like 7 German planes that were surrounding Mackay the last time that Decker saw him, and that he was most likely dead. There's no way that he could have made it out alive because Decker says he was fighting 3 German planes of his own, and there was no way that he could have helped his comrade out, and that he got left for dead basically. But then after Decker leaves the office, Major Wilson and Major General Harper, they're having a private conversation, and they collect like all of his things, like his wallet and his dog tags, and he has some of his personal items, and they put them in like an envelope. His ID badge. Speaking of Decker, Decker's ID and all that stuff, and they're having a discussion, and Major General Harper, he sort of tends to believe Decker's story, whereas the Major General Harper, he's not buying any of his story. He thinks that this is a complete hoax and that this guy is just putting on, and he obviously doesn't think that time travel is possible, and they have a conversation back and forth, and then they end up finding in all of his effects, they find a gun that was still in the airplane. And
right, and so Harper's thinking, hey, I think he's here to kill McKay. Basically, he's like, somehow he's figured out that McKay's coming to visit this base today, and he's going to kill him. And this is where I think Major Wilson makes a strong point. He's like, sir, he's like, if he was going to try to kill McKay, he said he would have that on him. He's like, it was left on the plane. He's like, so I don't think he intended it. So you kind of see that Major Wilson, hey, he's starting to believe this guy, where Harper's just like, hey, this is just a big elaborate hoax, or he had something more treacherous that he was going to do, right. Just not giving us all the facts of what he was going to do. So I think it's really interesting that the next scene, you got Decker, and he's basically a prisoner, if you will. He's looking out the window. He's like, why am I stuck in here? And General Harper comes in and starts talking to him. You know what I mean? So, or not Harper. This is Wilson, isn't it?
Yep, Wilson. And
yeah, and so they start. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, it was just an interesting line that Wilson tells Decker. He says, "Look, you have to realize that you're asking us to believe something rather incredible." He's like, "Don't blame us because we're taking the proper precautions." Because Decker is upset because he's not like in a jail cell, but he's kind of in a holding area, and he's got a guard out front watching him or whatever. And he's trying to tell Decker, look, we're just trying to do our job. You expect us to believe that you went into this white cloud, and then all this, and it was 1917, and then you come out, and it's 1959. This has never happened before. And then Decker says, well, it's happened today. It's happened now. And they go on, and they have a pretty heated discussion. And this is probably the key scene or key point in the whole episode. Decker starts to explain. He changes his story basically, and he talks about how he was afraid, and really he just kind of left McKay. He left him high and dry, so to speak. That he flew up really high in the clouds because he was afraid, and that he's always been afraid. He talks about how he kind of puts on a face. You got all these macho. By the way, let me just insert here. They're basically, at this point in time, they're flying in a tin can with wings. The bravery it took to get into one of these machines and to fly and do what they did and to fight battles and, dogfights in the air. What do you call those? World War I aces, I think is what they were called back then. These guys had to show an extreme amount of bravery, and Decker is kind of talking, he explains like, yeah, when we're down on the ground and we're going out and we're doing different things, or we're having a beer, or we're carousing around, I can put on the mask, but really when we get into the air, all I want to do is run away. The last thing I want to do is engage into any kind of combat. And it was like, he said, like, McKay, it seems like he went looking for a fight, and I just don't have that in me. I went even as far as to put fake bullet holes into my plane to sort of prove that I was brave, and I'm not on that level. So.
Right, and you kind of wonder how many of his colleagues has he seen get shot down, because it's obviously put a fear into him that he's scared just to even come in contact with him. And I kind of wonder, how many of his friends, or maybe people in his own, air group, whatever you want to call them, how many of his friends have died, being shot down in World War One. I thought that was very telling of him.
Yeah, and then we come to the key part, kind of in this scene, as Decker is revealing to the Major Wilson that he is afraid and that he changed his story and he sort of comes clean. Major Wilson says, it's not a crime to be afraid. He kind of consoles him a little bit and says, look, everybody gets afraid. And then we stumble on to the idea, I can't remember the exact exchange of words, but they stumble on to the idea of, Decker says, look, there's a way, if you let me go, maybe there's a way that I can go back and right my wrongs, or, get redemption. And that's kind of one of the main things that I liked about the episode, was everybody would, I would assume, I would think anybody and everybody would want to go back to a particular point in time in their life when they would want to right a wrong. And so Decker has this opportunity, and through the course of their conversation, of course, Major Wilson says, no, there's no way we can let you go. And so the idea sort of is hatched, and he says, Decker says, there's no way that Mackay is even going to have a chance if I don't go back and try to find him.
Right, but more than that, I think he knows Mackay is coming, and he's like, but how do you know he's coming? He's like, maybe when I came here, that Mackay's not coming. You know what I mean? So it's the whole time travel thing. The things that he did in the past, is it affect, since he came to the future or whatever, is it going to mess up the timeline continuity? He's like, so how do you actually know that he's going to be coming if you don't let me get out of here and get back in the air and get out of here and not see him? So very interesting point right here.
So it's that whole Back to the Future time continuum. Time and space continuum.
Don't get us started.
This was the original time,
right, Marty.
the time space continuum, right? This is the original one, and from 1960.
Right.
So yeah, that was very well stated. That was kind of the turning point. That's how the idea is hatched, and so eventually, of course, Wilson's not going to let him go, and then Decker decks Wilson, and he decks the guard, which I thought that was hilarious. When he punches the second guard in the stomach, I mean, he goes down like he's dead. And like all he does is get punched.
And he stays there for a long time.
I know. It's like, man, well, that's some kind of punch to knock somebody out by hitting him in the stomach. But
well, on the other hand, when he hits Wilson, though, he lays there, he like knocks him out for a few minutes or whatever. You know what I mean?
Right.
So maybe they're just trained harder in the France. You know what I mean?
Right. So Decker runs out the room, the holding area, and he passes another female airman who looks at him rather strangely and really long stare as he's running out onto the airfield. And then, of course, he starts running to find his airplane, to find his bomber, and he gets in and checks the instrument panel, I think, and then runs out. And it's awesome because this is the old style where he has to crank the propeller, and his whole motion of cranking the propeller is really cool. And so then like a mechanic runs over, and he's like, hey, what are you doing? And he punches the mechanic right in the face. And so the mechanic is laid out, and then eventually Major Wilson catches up with him, and he's got him at gunpoint, and he tells him to turn off your airplane or I'll fire. And this is really, really the turning point. You can see the change in Decker's character, because he is brave in this moment, because he tells Major Wilson, he's like, look, you're going to have to kill me. I'm going back. If you're going to fire that gun, you might as well fire it now and kill me now, because there's no way that I'm going to stop what I'm doing. And so I thought that was a pretty cool part. And so eventually Harper, got a lot of characters here. Major Wilson lets him go, and Decker's on the runway, and he, there's some stock footage of one of these old airplanes taking off, and he's in the air again, and he flies up into the cloud, and we leave Major Wilson standing on the runway. And then the next scene we find, we are back in Major General Harper's office again, and he tells Major Wilson, he's like, "You're in big trouble. You know that, right?" And he's like, "Yeah, I know I'm in big trouble." And another man enters the room, and he announces the arrival of Mackay, Alexander Mackay, and he's an older man, obviously, and he enters the room, and the introductions are made. And then one of the first questions that is asked of Mackay is, "Do you know Lieutenant William Terrence Decker?" And I think Mackay says something like, "Well, I should know him. He saved my life." So we're getting a little insight into the fact that the plan must have worked. Decker's plan to go back in time and to save Mackay from that terrible dogfight must have worked, because we learn later in the scene. Jimbo, did you have something to interject?
Right. Well, and then you still have General Harper, still not wanting to believe. He's like, "Hey, didn't the Germans, once they shot somebody down or whatever, didn't they used to take all their belongings?" And Mackay's like, "Well, normally," he's like, "Well, did they do that with Decker?" And he's like, "No." He's like, "Not that I know of." And this is when he pulls out the envelope and he dumps all the belongings out there on the ground, and it's got the Royal Squadron flying corps, his identification, and all this other stuff. You know what I mean? And he's like, he can't believe, "Where did you get this?" He's like, "I haven't seen these in so long." And they're like, "They're his?" And he's like, "Yeah, they're his. They're this actual thing. This is him." So now you have confirmation that was actually him there. So McKay's like, "How'd you get this?" He said, "This is the greatest scene of this episode." He's like, "Maybe you better sit down, old lead bottom."
Right, right.
So he's like, "What'd you call me?" He's like, and now I think Major Harper is starting to realize, like, hey, what just happened? So he looks out the window and he goes back up to the white cloud. And that's the end of the episode, basically. So let me go ahead and throw some stuff out here that I found. Writer Richard Matheson explained that the title of this episode and his short story referred to both the protagonist's physical journey as well as his departure from cowardice. This was filmed at Norton Air Force Base in San Bernardino, California. There are several military aircraft in this episode, and I'm just going to name a few that we see. The first aircraft Decker taxis by in his aircraft after he lands is a C-124 Globemaster. When Decker first exits his aircraft, there's a Jeep immediately behind it, a service truck behind the Jeep, and a USAF F-100 Super Sabre jet in the background. When Decker and Wilson get out of the Jeep, there is a C-47 Skytrain, which is the equivalent to a DC-3, parked in the hangar behind them. Major General Harper has an F-104 Starfighter model on his desk. Then there are 3 pictures of jets hanging in Major General Harper's office. The first 2 are on the right side of the room and can be seen briefly as Harper passes by them. The first is a U.S. Navy F-9F Cougar. The second one is an A-4 Skyhawk. And then the third is in the back of the room to the right of the door. It appears to be a C-124 Globemaster. But no one can tell if it's the engines are jets or propellers. Another one is when Decker goes to the window in Harper's office, he sees a USAF F-100 Super Sabre taxiing on the tarmac. The 4-plane flyby is done by F-100 Super Sabres. The C-124 Globemasters are seen parked in the line after the flyby. And when Decker runs back to his plane, there are 3 F-102 Delta Dagger jets in the background. So for those of you that are interested in airplanes and the different models and makes, these are what were in this episode. The rank of Air Vice Marshal AVM in the RAF is equivalent to the rank of Major General in the USAF. Therefore, Officers Harper and McKay are of equal rank. When Decker arrives in the Lafayette Air Base, he is told that he is an American base. When he sees the 1959 aircraft for the first time, he says, "We had no idea that you guys were so advanced." However, he shouldn't be surprised that there is an American airbase in France at all, as the United States did not declare war on Germany until April 6, 1917, 1 month after Decker had left.
Huh.
Eric, you got something to add right there?
No, just the dates I thought that were interesting. That this particular episode was released February 5th, 1960, and in the actual episode, the current date was March the 5th, 1959. So it was like 11 months before the episode even aired.
Right.
So I don't know maybe if they were filming the episode, like maybe that was the actual date when they were filming. It was around March of 1959, and then it didn't air until like 11 months later. I thought that was interesting. And then the whole 1917 wrinkle, you can add that on. That was kind of interesting.
Right. Decker is flying a Newport 28, which entered service in early 1918. However, the date is supposed to be March 5th, 1917. Furthermore, the Newport was a French-built aircraft that was flown by the French and Americans, but not the Royal Flying Corps. So the airplane he was flying wasn't even supposed to be one that they flew.
Okay.
Decker looks out the window of the general's office to see a 1959 jet aircraft pass on the airfield. However, other shots in the same office show the window overlooks a parking lot with palm trees and cars. And there's something about the procedures of the military personnel. Military officers do not render a hand salute when they are uncovered without a hat. In this production, not only does an officer without a hat salute a superior, but the other officers are wearing hats indoors, something that's not supposed to be done. And lastly, when the air vice marshal enters the room, they render a hand salute. The correct action is when a superior officer enters the room, you come to attention. So, Eric, go ahead and give me your thoughts on this episode before I give you mine.
I know you weren't a fan of this one. Anything having to do with time travel, I'm sorry, I'm gonna love it. I thought it was a great story. The fact, more than the time travel element, which is always a good element, you could throw that into anything and it's pretty awesome because everyone wants to be able to time travel. But the idea of redemption and what you mentioned earlier, the turning from cowardice, this Terrence Decker, he finds an inner strength. His character evolves from being sort of cowardly to courage. And this is really what bravery looks like. And, I mentioned it a little bit earlier in the episode, but the fact that there were men who were willing to go and, do these types of things, the bravery that they displayed, just to even get up in one of those tin cans and to be able to fly around, and regardless of the fact you have someone else shooting at you. And there was no modern day ejection seat with parachutes and all of the modern day technologies that, I'm sure that the Air Force has today. If you got hit, you were done for. And I don't know, I really liked it. I liked the story. I liked the character development. I liked the time travel element. And I liked the fact that the Decker was willing to admit to himself and to someone else that, he was afraid. That, that's a scary job. And that he didn't have to put on a mask anymore. And that he could go and right a wrong. He could go back and fix something where he messed up. Where something that he could change in his life. And again, I just thought that was the great part of the episode. And every one of us, no doubt, would want to go back and change something or right or wrong that they have done in the past. And I just thought that was one of the good speaking points.
Right. I see what you're saying.
Okay.
But let me pose something else. The whole story episode revolves around this cloud, right?
Okay.
That's how he got here. He said he shot up through this cloud, right? So I'm supposed to believe that, hey, this guy he landed on our airfield. He's been taken to interrogation for who knows how long. He's escaped, and he gets back on his plane, and he flies through the same cloud. You want me to believe this? With the Earth rotating, clouds moving across the sky, you want me to believe... this is the Twilight Zone, don't get me wrong. But if it is the Twilight Zone, let me ask you this. if that's the case, then how come somebody didn't get in an airplane and fly off? And if they went through this cloud, would they be transported back to 1917 with him? Another point. If he was really seriously being chased, as we come to find out with Colonel Alexander McKay, said he saved my life. There was three Germans chasing him. Where are the Germans? The Germans would have came through the same cloud and would have ended up in the same thing, unless they got disoriented and crashed. But I'm sure to be an air pilot like that, Air Force pilot, and even in the German army, that you're going to be expert enough not to crash land just going into a cloud. So that was a big sticking point for me. I understand the whole, they wanted to make it Hollywood, they wanted to make it a story, and the story was okay. Another thing is, with Decker going back into time, did he actually change the story? You never know, because you see that he said that Decker says, I need to go back. I need, because he even said, we used to split up. I would make it a point to split up and fight, or do our rounds, whatever. And then when McKay comes in, he actually says, hey, we used to split up. He's like, but for this day, we were actually together doing this mission. And that's when the Germans surrounded him. And that's where he said he saved his life. So my question to you is, does McKay know the truth? Because he says that Decker saved his life that day. My next question is, by him saying that, did Decker die that day? Did he die when McKay says that he saved his life? Is it assumed that Decker went back, and when he did that, the Germans shot him down and killed him for his redemption story?
I think that it's implied, that Decker essentially died, and he sacrificed himself so that McKay could, go stay alive and go down through time and end up in that meeting with the officers of the American Air Force Base.
So my next question to you is, if they would have kept Decker detained and McKay would have seen Decker, what would have been the outcome?
A nuclear explosion, or the space-time continuum would implode on itself and it would be a black hole, right?
Well, that's just something I always wondered about this episode, because they weren't going to let him go. And they said, well, when McKay gets here, we will find out exactly who you are and if he knows you and all that. And I always wanted to know, if they would have met face-to-face, would it have messed up something in their whole time continuum thing? Because if Decker, it doesn't really make sense, because if Decker's in the present, then that means that McKay should have already been dead. True.
Good.
So how can McKay in the present be coming to the base? If Decker's there, then he shouldn't technically exist right now. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, they're all good questions. Maybe you should start the Twilight Zone blog for this episode and get some input on some scenarios and ideas.
I'm just saying it's very confusing. Very confusing, because you can't have one and the other without. You can't have one being here and one not being here without a sacrifice of one or the other. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, but you got to remember, this is the infancy of the writing about time travel. I mean, we're still new. They're still learning.
So now you want to make excuses.
Well, no, they're still learning. I mean, all of those things were probably not reasoned out. I mean, they were pumping out episodes every week. You think Rod Serling had time to sit down and think about every possible scenario of his story? Actually, it wasn't written by Rod Serling, was it? It was.
Okay, but you go back and you look at his space episodes about exploring space and landing on asteroids and all that. That stuff doesn't happen either. You know what I mean? But it's fantastic, even though he may have the time wrong, where it's 11,000 miles to this planet or 1,000,000 miles to this planet. It still made sense.
Well, actually, we wouldn't have to ask Rod Serling. We would have to ask Richard Matheson, because he's the one that wrote the story. So, the holes in his story would need to be taken up with him. So, there you go. All good questions, though.
I know you like this episode, but for me, it falls in the probably bottom 2 episodes of the season so far that we have watched. It's just very confusing. I was jumping all over the place, and it didn't have that one moment that's like, aha. You know what I mean? Like the actual Twilight Zone moment, the boom, here it is, here's the final cut. I think this one was left more open-ended for discussion like we're having today.
Okay.
So, There you have it. That is episode number, what was that, 18?
Number 18.
The Last Flight. Don't forget the Twilight Zone contest going on all the way up till October 31st. Be sure to send an email to thetragedyofcinema@gmail.com with the secret word for each episode to get more entries to win the Tragedy of Cinema coffee mug. That did arrive at my house, so I have it in possession.
Awesome.
And as soon as October 31st, about 8 o'clock, I will be mailing it out, we'll do a random number generator, and I will make that announcement and be shipping that out. Any final thoughts, Eric?
No, I think you covered everything.
All right. Well, with that being said, this episode's coming to a close, and that's a wrap.
And cut.
Eric?